Welcome to the Content Strategy Interviews podcast. Each week, we talk with accomplished content strategy experts to share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. And now, here's your host, Gerry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 23 of the Content Strategy Interviews podcast. Really happy today to have with us Gerry McGovern. Gerry has been doing content strategy as long as anybody I know, but he would argue these days that content isn't the strategy, the tasks are the strategy. So welcome, Gerry. Tell the folks a little bit about your background, how you came to I know at one point you identified as a content person, but now I think you identify more as a task person.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Larry. I think, it's, how we describe ourselves, maybe we've got the same broad intent in many ways. My background was from journalism and content, so at heart I'm somebody who's more comes from a word or a language point of view than the technical or the programming side or the visual design. So certainly, and I continuously write. I'm always, writing my newsletter or books or articles or stuff like that. So it's not that I've left the world of content. I suppose when I started long time ago now, back in the mid-90s, I was a freelance journalist and I saw the web, I think like many people, and thought, wow, this is going to change the world. This is such an exciting thing to get involved in. And basically, I tried to understand it and, as much as I could and figure out what was happening. And the more I looked at it, the more I saw, even from the early listservs, this sense of, community or shift, if only a subtle shift in power away from organizations towards customers. So something was happening that was shifting power, not everywhere, but in some certain places, away from organizations and towards the customers. And that has been my, so to speak, North Star for the last 20 years or so. It's that, if you really want to be successful, you need to be customer centric. That's the shift, the advantage, and what does that entail, and what does that mean, and how do you do that in digital? And in a lot of times, the customer centricity is articulated by content. It's articulated by a heading or a search result. It's words. People navigate through this digital space still today, essentially through words. I mean, maybe in 10 or 15 years, we'll really have virtual reality and we'll navigate through spaces and through a much more visual landscape. But today, the landscape is built of words. It's still built of words. It's still, if you want to get found in Google and you don't have any words, your chances of getting found are not too great. So the content is the foundation of the digital customer experience. So the most essential aspect or element of delivering a great customer experience is the content. So I've just changed my focus a bit to let's focus on the customer. What do they want more? Because I think that's where the ultimate game is at. That's why we're doing this, or why is this different? Well, it's to help people do stuff, help people, figure out stuff, get on with their lives, buy stuff, or figure out to live healthier lives, or to figure out what mortgage they should get. Or that ultimately, if we make the focus on the customer and customer centricity, then what supports that, a lot of it are words. It's content. So I still end up doing a hell of a lot of content related stuff, even though I more call myself the area in customer experience or that sort of that broad area.
Right. I'm really curious about many evolutions that have happened, because I've been on the same journey. I got in the web about 95, 96 as well. No, even before that, 94, I think. Anyhow, but I remember, like, for example, remember Pointcast came out in about 96, and I just remember viscerally thinking, this is wrong, because that was a pushy thing, and I felt like, this is a pull thing, and that was sort of my little proto-lizard brain trying to get my head around it. And so you were experiencing the same kind of stuff. You mentioned that, and then, like, when I first met you was about 10 years ago here in Seattle. You talked about customer care words. as opposed to keywords. And that has sort of, and I can totally see the evolution of that insight into this emphasis on tasks. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like sort of did you have any like sort of like aha, eureka moments along the way that pushed you forward?
Yeah, well, like I remember podcast now, I'd totally forgotten about it, but I remember the exact same experiences you had. I mean, everyone was saying, oh, there's this new real cool thing. And I think we had to download it or something like that. And then it started taking over your bloody computer. Like it was just bombing you with all this stuff. And I think I lasted about a week and I said, enough, I just got rid of it. Because, that's not what I, came on the web for, just to be bombarded by, and then of course it was totally random. Today, it's much more sophisticated and subtle, that in relation to, sending people what they want. So, definitely there was stuff then that says, well, this is not what we want, or this is not what we need. And I think the moments were, I remember once, figuring out like the search words and the care words and understanding what triggers people once they arrive at the site. But really, starting out, one of the first early dawnings was when, I don't know how I came about it, but I was looking at, how cheap flights and low fares. And this is kind of the reverse. There's brand words, there's search words, and there's care words. And the low fares was the brand words, the branding. And I remember being at a big travel conference. It was about 2001 or 2002, somewhere in that territory. And I said to the audience, how many people do you think every month search for low fares? And people, 10,000, 12,000. And maybe there was about 10,000 people a month. So I says, how many people a month do you think search for cheap flights? And they says, maybe about 40,000. Well, how about 2 million? In the process. So there was that, difference between here's the words that you want them to articulate, because low fares and then somebody in the audience said, we could never use the word cheap. It would hurt our brand, in the process. And, and then 5-6 years later, they're all using the word cheap flights because otherwise they're not going to get found. So I think that sense of there's a language out there that you're not in control of, that, as clever as you are with your marketing or your PR or whatever, if a language rises up on the web, it's the language to go with. So there's one side there that's the branding, the low fares, and then there's the cheap flights. But then there's another language when you actually arrive at the site, because you don't necessarily want to read cheap flights. You might have searched for it, but when you arrive at the site, it's book a flight. There's a branding language which can really make you get lost. If you use low fares and nobody's searching for it in the process. So if you don't use the language people are searching for, but the search language is just one step in the customer journey. It's a significant step, but it's one step. So it's like passing a baton on in a 400 relay or whatever. You've got to pass it on to another set of words in many situations. Right. Like you may search for cheap hotels, but you don't want to arrive at a hotel website saying, welcome to our cheap hotel.
Our flea bag hotel. Yeah,
our cheap flea bag hotel. You don't have to bring any fleas. We've got lots of them. So there's, and I remember doing a big university master's, a site that did a lot of MBAs and stuff like that. And we noticed people would search for top ranking universities and etc. But when they came to the site itself, it was more advance your career. What they were looking for. I'm on $100,000. Will I be on $130,000 if I do this MBA? How does this advance my career? So these were the type of words, but nobody would search for that, advance your career. So there's a different construction of words. There's certain words that will bring you to a website, and then there can be, sometimes they overlap, but then there can be another set that really bring you through a website, and those tend to be more tasky. They tend to be more intently, or what I call care words, the things that really trigger your intent, that are inside your brain, that are not necessarily the words that you're searching for. And we need to design for both environments.
I love what you said about the baton, because I think about that a lot. The passing the baton, there's sort of in that customer journey, there's, depending on, people articulate it different ways, but there's like the sales funnel, or there's the mapping the user journey that UX people would use, but there's all these kind of handoff points. And one of the things that struck me as I kind of read up on your current work about this is that I have a feeling you would have a lot of insight for content marketers, because I think a lot of content marketing is just like kind of conventional and done because you feel like you have to do it. But if you have this, I think if content marketers had this idea of like, okay, they're not quite a customer yet, I got to get them in here. And then, but I think your main big point these days is like, you're more concerned with the existing customer and getting them to be like your evangelist, your brand marketer, your product developer. It's like you're putting them to work, even though they're, as you also say, you call them the dictator now.
Exactly.
Not the king. Customer isn't king, they're the dictator.
Something like that. Yeah, and because all of us are more impatient. We're more, it's great they've got Wi-Fi on the plane. Then next week, why is the Wi-Fi so bloody slow? It's like, it's great that they have it, and then you're complaining like hell because it's slow. Our expectations are constantly rising and in the process. But I think that's a big shift, Larry. If we see the way things are being sold today, they're being sold either through, it's free, use it, see what you think, so it's true use. So we're not going to market to you. We're not going to make you promises. We're not going to tell you a story of, what it's going to be like when you buy our product. We say, hey, try it. So then, that cuts out a lot of traditional marketing, which is storytelling. Hey, try it. It's free for 30 days, or you get 5 people for free. If you need more, you have to pay, so that sort of freemium or the model of really industrializing trials in the process. And then, of course, the other model, which is how Slack has grown and how Amazon has grown, how good. You look at the really big brands, even Facebook. Did Facebook or Amazon or Google, have they done mega Marlboro advertising campaigns in the early days to get people? They really didn't. Maybe in later years, what did Yahoo do when it was going down the drain? It did loads of TV advertising. You kind of knew it. You knew it had lost when it had to go on TV to try and explain why you should use Yahoo. As somebody once said to me, I stopped using Yahoo when I had to search for the search. It had just become so cluttered and so aimless. So it had to hire an advertising agency to explain its use. Well, when you have to do that in the digital age, you're in trouble. And so I think your current customer is the driver of your marketing, because either in social media or otherwise, if the people who are using the product are the very best people, they're the most credible. Today we're more skeptical. Fake news, it's not a new phenomenon. We've been dealing with it for a long time. It's just it's exploded. So we're trying to keep it real and get as close to, listen, I'm going to try this. I'm going to use it. And if I can't get to use it, I'd like to talk to somebody who is using it. So that I think that's the shift in marketing, and your good marketer is facilitating their current customers to tell the story for them. And it's a different role for marketing. I think a lot of content marketing is really terrible. It just annoys the hell out of people.
Yeah, and you're making me think of so many people. I don't have a feel for like how many people still conceive of branding in sort of old-fashioned terms. But you would argue that branding happens when customers talk to each other, not when you're transmitting your brand to the world, by your marketing messages. Is that accurate?
Exactly. I mean, branding has been hijacked or was hijacked, 20, 30, 40 years ago when, a very particular concept of branding, mass advertising. In essence, products like Coca-Cola and Marlboro, that actually, the more you actually knew about them, the less you'd want to buy them. So, a type of branding emerged that was essentially, telling a fable or a story, or, the Marlboro is the Marlboro man. It's not the man in the hospital with lung cancer. It's the Marlboro, it's the rugged riding the horse, etc. So these sorts of brands emerged in the 60s and 50s and 60s and 70s. And then everybody seemed to think, oh, that's what branding is. That's it's a very particular type of branding. It's branding that occurs when your product has no information. It's not that it's zero Coke. It's Coke Zero. Coke has zero information, because the more you learn about Coke, the less you'd want to buy it. The 12 spoons of sugar, etc., etc. So they have to create this amazing story that has got absolutely nothing to do with the product. But actually, there's millions of products that you actually need to know about. You need to know about a house that you're going to buy, how many rooms, how many bathrooms, what square footage, what's the garden. You need to know about the car you're going to buy. You need to know about your insurance policy. If you're worried about you've got diabetes, you need to know. So there's a whole world out there where you need to know about stuff. You really need to know. It's important for you to know. And that's where I think the branding occurs through the use of the thing. Toyota is a reliable car. Is it a reliable car because the advertising agency said it's a reliable car, or is it a reliable car because it's reliable? And because the neighbor says to you, I've been driving it for 10 years, I haven't had a problem. Oh, it's a reliable car. It's a reliable car because it's actually reliable. So there's a hell of a lot of products and services that their brand is what they are. And if you're lucky enough to work for that type of product, you don't need to invent stories about it. You need to allow it to express itself through use, and to allow the people who really like using it to express themselves about it as well. So you're a facilitator of the story that's already there.
Right, kind of keeping the conversation going. Now you're making me wonder. I'm trying to think of examples. Like, if you look at the world of commerce, I mean, Amazon has clearly figured out how to, is definitely employing that model. But I think of things like fast food and sodas. People still eat that crap and drink that stuff all the time. So I'm thinking forward a little bit. Is that just will we look back in 10 years as like, oh, what a cute little vestige of old-fashioned branding that was. Now everybody.
Yeah, no, I don't think so, Larry, because there's certain areas, like not everything works on TV. Not every product is advertised on TV. There's certain types of products, mass market, etc. Not everything is advertised on radio. So there's those sorts of things that are bad for us. We don't want to know the truth. Sometimes we want to be bad, and we want to, have a Coke or have a Big Mac, or, we know it's not good for us, but it's fun and we enjoy it. You don't want to overdo it. And that's a kind of speaking to the reptilian brain, a kind of the emotional, that's a beautiful pictures and, stuff. That's always going to be with us. So there's always going to be the sinful type of stuff, if you believe in that. So that's never going to go away. But that's less. What do you do with that in digital? Maybe you can have digital experiences, but it's not really. Well, you can totally. I suppose it really depends what you want. You look at the whatever that other stuff that gives you wings.
Red Bull.
Red Bull, and they actually had to stop saying that because it was proved that it didn't give all that many boosts or stuff like that. So you can get into that world where you actually have a totally blank canvas, and you can do whatever you want because people just want a reason to be sinful. They want a reason to drink something or smoke something, or get that just that adrenaline push. So there's a whole world of that. It's not going to go away.
Right.
It's not going to go away. It's not going to be, because human instinct, we've still got emotions, we still are vain, we've still got egos, we've still got all, they're not going away anytime soon. So that's a whole other really big world. But there's another big world that emerged with the web, which is, hey, I want to check this out. I want to, if we think about, Larry, you go back to the 90s, how difficult it was to find out about medical conditions, about buying a house. So much stuff was so hard. You were either dependent on talking to a doctor, a sales rep. There was all these intermediaries that held the information and controlled the information. So the world has totally opened up for us. So in a new, educated, more skeptical.
Oh, you just broke up for a second. Apologies, we had a technical issue here. Gerry lost his internet connection for a couple minutes. We got that figured out, and we resume in the middle of me asking a long-winded question, but trust me, stick around, it's worth hearing Gerry's answer. Realizing that, like, no, when the merchant pays attention to me and focuses on my needs, that's better. And the way you articulate that is with key tasks. And you've done a lot of presentations that show like that sort of a pie chart that shows, or you can do it with a distribution curve as well. But in any case, you almost always find that there's like 3, 4, 5, 6 key tasks that people end up at a website to do, and that you should focus on those, and that you have better results than the one you do. One of the key things that comes out of that, then the thing I wanted to get to, is that oftentimes that means in your consulting projects that you're having a website remove 80 to 90% of its content, which, like, for content creators, we're like, oh, we're cranking it out, we're doing a great job. It's like, maybe not. So talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
Well, I think it's part of the evolution away from projects and content creation to content evolution, to the model of continuous improvement, of the eternal beta, of the ongoing world. So I think that there's lots of work for content people in this model. It's just that they're improving what they've created and optimizing and refining, rather than producing lots of more stuff. So I think there's this small core set of stuff, these top tasks that are of critical importance to people. And, we need to make sure that these are performing well, and that we're constantly optimizing them, making them easier to understand, faster, to do. So this sort of focus on, clinical, making it really easy to understand this stuff. I saw this thing in Australia for this medical 999 ambulance, the emergency ambulance, and they were saying that if they changed it from what has happened to what's happened, they saved 9 seconds, in the overall getting to the nub of the problem and getting that ambulance going. And that, of course, in these sorts of life-saving events, so this hospital and hospital group here are really rigorous about the language. We so underestimate the need for precision in language, even if we're in content. We so underestimate the actual incredible latent power of words, and how the exact right combination of words can have a tremendous impact on human behavior. And we spend our lives, unfortunately, just like coal miners, digging coal and shoveling it, whereas we really should be gold miners, sifting stuff, but even though we are surrounded by words and language, most people forget the real, true, latent power of getting that exact right combination of language. And instead, it's so much easier to measure volume. than to measure impact.
Right.
Impact is hard to measure, so we won't measure it. So volume is easy to measure, so let's measure it. So
well, let me ask,
yeah.
I want to ask you about it, because that was I've seen a number of your presentations, like in person and online, and you often share the data about what those key tasks are on a site. I'm curious about the methodology behind that. Like, is it mostly survey stuff or research or interviews, or how do you elicit that?
It's a very special type of survey. It should not work as a survey method. Essentially, you go through a big initial process to figure out, well, what's the task environment? So we did a big health one recently about health in dealing with your health. So there's everything from check symptoms, diagnosis, cost, fees, screening and vaccinations, where to go for help, all the stuff that might really, really matter in either managing a long-term condition or diagnosing a new condition. Everything to do with health. And in most of these environments, whether it's buying a car with Toyota or dealing with your health or IKEA or the BBC or whoever, there's no more than 100 tasks. So the task environment can be framed in under 100 things. That if you're buying a big data center from Cisco, there's not more than 100 really important things that could be in it. So there's a big exercise to build that list, and usually it's about 50 to 80, somewhere in that territory.
Is that a combination of both internal folks and customers? Okay.
Exactly. And you're looking at, so when we did this for the health, we didn't say, oh, in dealing with your health on our website. We said, no, you try and stay big. Talk about in dealing with your health. So you're not talking about digital, you're not talking about physical, you're talking about everything that matters. Because some of the things that really matter to people, you might not be able to deal with right now, but at least you need to know the importance of them. So you're really trying to frame it very much from the customer's point of view. But you'll take feedback from management. So we talk to doctors, we talk to nurses, we talk to managers, we talk to patients, we looked at social media. So you're really saying, what's the map here of this area? What's the basic parameters of the map? So then we get those 50 to 80 things, and we literally give the entire list randomized to people on their own, and we say and force them to quickly choose five or less things. So in dealing with your health, what's the 5 most important things to you? And every time we do that, we get the patterns. We get this. There's a relatively small set of stuff that gets a disproportion. So if there was 100 things, then typically the top 5 will get as much of the vote as the bottom 50. And that has happened in Brazil, in Iceland, all over the United States, in Norway, in Ireland, in UK, in Australia, New Zealand, for doctors, for engineers, for students, for teachers, for nurses, for pay, whatever the problem is, there's always this small set of critical stuff. So not alone do you get what really matters, almost as important, you get what doesn't matter or what's of lesser importance, because it's often the bottom 50 that are disrupting the top 5, because there's an inverse relationship. Often the less important something is to the customer, the more content is being created for it, because the organization has this psychological view that you create importance through production of content. So the empty vessel makes the most noise,
Right.
Often the less demand the organization, but if only we created loads of stuff about it, we'd create demand. Not necessarily. Often what you do there by doing it is you take away your people's time. They can't focus on the top task because they're spending their time pumping out content. It reminds me, many years ago, I was doing work with the Environmental Protection Agency, and in the US 10 or 15 years, and they were saying they had no time or resource to focus on the Clean Air Act or stuff like that, and the big stuff that was happening. It says, because what happens is, there's a team in Alabama about saving badgers, and they know there's enough badgers now. The badgers have been saved. So there's too many badgers in Alabama. But the team are producing hundreds of pictures of cuddly badgers because they want to keep their, they've got their pet projects. So there's all these little teams all over the EPA with their pet projects, saving badgers. And there's nobody to look after the Clean Air Act, or there isn't nearly enough people to really focus on what millions of people want to know about. And
right.
often...
That gets to the second thing I wanted to ask about, actually. So there's the first part, like the methodology to get the data about doing it. And then because we're in an interactive digital environment, it's easy to test that.
Absolutely.
And so I'm just curious, but I wonder, I have a feeling that it's not a straight line from that testing and evaluation to implementing human change in an organization.
Well, it's hard. I mean, we did Cisco. We've done a lot of work with Cisco. The top task their customers was downloading software because they're technical. They're network engineers. Hundreds of thousands visit every week or whatever. So what we did was, we said, okay, so let's measure downloading software. So we came up with a bunch of tasks like download the latest firmware for the RV over 2 router. And we give real engineers that task. But the change that happened, which is what you talked about, is that the software team used to be measured on creating the firmware and uploading it into the system. That was their job. I've created this firmware, it works, I put it up in the system. We changed the model of measurement to now their job was helping the engineer to find and download the right firmware. So instead of them being producers, they had to manage the customer journey, the consumption. And once they were measured on the findability and the usability, so before, in 2010, when we first measured it, it was an average of 15 steps and 280 seconds to download a piece of software or firmware. In 2013, it was down to 4 steps and 40 seconds because we started measuring the consumption rather than the production. So the cultural change is, you identify what's critical to people, and then you measure the team based on the customer's ability to find and consume that critical thing, rather than on the production of the components or the graphics or the content for it. That's the big shift. That's the hardest cultural shift. But if you can shift those metrics, you really bring about a transformation.
Yep. No, that's that's just another example of that big shift from like push to pull from
exactly.
In another context, you talk about, no, it's not a selling economy, or it's a buying economy now. People are buying stuff. You're not selling stuff to them. And hey, we're coming up on time, Gerry. God, there's a gazillion other things I'd like to talk to you about, and I'm looking forward to I'll see you at Confab. I hope we can catch up and have
great.
something
Absolutely.
there.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, just before we wrap up, I always like to give folks an opportunity. If there's anything last, anything we haven't talked about, anything that it doesn't even have to be about content strategy, but anything in the digital world or the content world that's been on your mind lately, or.
Well, another area that I've been working on the last couple of years has been really looking at trust. And the connection with trust and use. And it's funny, isn't it? A lot of the things that we use, we don't trust. If we look at Facebook, we've known about Facebook for years. We know what Google does. We know Uber. You wouldn't necessarily trust Uber management, would you? So a lot of the companies, that we actually use, we don't necessarily trust. So why are we with them? Because they're really useful. In many ways, use trumps trust in, simplicity, ease of use, convenience, etc. And it's interesting, where is the tipping point? Where do we get to a point where we really care about our privacy? Because we really don't care. At the end of the day, you go to Google and you say, I accept. I just want to make a search. I don't care. In the process. When does the point come? Maybe we're coming towards it. But what it does indicate is that if something is useful, something is really useful and easy, the customer gives it a hell of a lot of leeway. But if it's hard, if it's complex, if it's difficult, forget about it. The power of being useful, overrides so many. I'm not saying it should. I'm not saying that but if you are useful, if you are simple and easy, simple and easy is the gold dust. It's the diamonds of today. It's the things that we just are so attracted to. That's simple. That's easy. We lose so much else perspective when we get something that makes our life easier. So that can be psychologically manipulative or other things, but it goes to show we talk a lot about trust, but when the rubber hits the road, we go with the stuff that makes our lives easier. Right.
That harkens back to what we were talking about in the branding area earlier about that. You just sometimes you need rationalization to consume that burger or drink that Coke. Same thing with it's almost a higher level of that same dynamic that it's just easier and quicker. And in an age where we're all stressed for time and
exactly
our attention spans are short, I can sort of see it. But it'll be interesting. I wonder if it'll come to a head. So. Well, thanks so much, Gerry. This is a super great conversation.
Thank you.
And look forward to catching up again soon. And thanks, and I'll see you in Minneapolis in a few weeks.
Great stuff. Look forward to seeing you, Larry. Okay.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye now. See you.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another content strategy interview.